I will never forget the loud crash that shook my quiet lake cabin that night. It was the kind of sound that makes your heart jump even if you are 72 years old and have heard many things in life. I was sitting in my old wooden chair, humming quietly to myself, when I heard footsteps outside, heavy, rushed, and angry. Before I could even stand up straight, the front door burst open like someone had kicked it with all their strength. 3 HOA patrol officers stormed into my cabin. They were wearing dark jackets with shiny badges that looked more important than they truly were. They pointed flashlights everywhere. On my walls, my table, my old boots by the door. But they didn't know something big. Something they were about to discover in the worst way possible. Because lying on my couch, wrapped in my favorite brown blanket, resting after a long week of work, was Sheriff Dalton, our town's firm but fair lawman, and he wasn't sleeping deeply anymore. He sat up slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked at the HOA officers like a lion waking up to find mice dancing in his cave. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" the sheriff said in a low, cold voice. The HOA patrol froze. One dropped his flashlight. Another started stuttering. The captain of the group, a tall man with a rough beard, took one slow step back. Outside, the wind blew against the broken door, making it creak like the whole lake was holding its breath. Then the sheriff stood up. And what he said next changed everything. But before we get there, let me tell you how all this trouble started, so you understand how a peaceful old man like me ended up with the HOA breaking into my cabin in the middle of the night. My name is Henry Walker. I am 72 years old, and I've lived by Lake Pinewood for more than 40 years. My cabin is small and made from thick logs. I cut myself back when my back was still strong and my beard still had some black in it. I like the quiet life, fishing at sunrise, feeding the ducks, fixing things around the cabin, and sometimes helping neighbors with small problems. My wife, Lily, used to say I had a soft heart because I liked helping people even when they didn't deserve it. She passed away 10 years ago, but her words still guide me. For many years, this place was simple. No noise, no trouble, no rules except the ones nature gave us. But then the Pinewood Lakeside HOA came. I remember their first meeting. They came wearing fancy clothes and fake smiles, promising to improve the community. They said they wanted the place to be cleaner, more organized, more appealing for future home buyers. But soon, we realized that what they really wanted was control. They created rules like no fishing before sunrise, do not hang clothes outside, only certain types of flowers allowed in your yard, and no wooden cabins without approval. They even complained that my cabin looked too old and not modern enough for the new community standards. Imagine that. Telling a man his own home doesn't fit in the land he built on with his own hands. I tried to be kind. I tried to talk to them calmly, the way my wife always wanted. I reminded myself of the things she used to say. "Henry, kindness makes the world softer, even when people try to make it hard." But the HOA didn't know soft. They only knew how to give warnings, fines, and threats. The real trouble started 2 weeks before the break-in. One morning, I found a red notice taped to my door. It said my cabin violated community appearance standards, and if I didn't upgrade it, they would take further action. I laughed at first. How could anyone look at my warm little cabin with its flowers in front, my rocking chair, my hanging lanterns, and think it needed upgrading? But the HOA didn't care. They only cared about power. Not long after that, Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, came running to my cabin, worried and out of breath. She told me the HOA patrol was planning a surprise inspection. She said she overheard them calling my place a problem they needed to solve once and for all. I didn't panic. I have lived long enough to know panic solves nothing. Instead, I cleaned the cabin a bit, brewed myself some tea, and waited. But something else happened that same day. Something small but kind. The kind of thing that reminds you there is goodness in people, even when the world feels tough. As I sat on my porch drinking tea, little 8-year-old Tommy, the boy who lived down the road, walked by holding a small wooden boat he'd made. He looked sad, so I called him over. "What's wrong, Tommy?" I asked. "The HOA said I can't sail my boat on the lake anymore," he said quietly. "They said the water is for approved activities only." I felt my chest tighten. A lake? With rules for children's boats? That was not the world I grew up in. So I took the small boat from his hands, examined it like it was the finest treasure, and told him, "Tommy, this lake belongs to the sky, the trees, and the water, not to the HOA. Come tomorrow after school. We'll sail it together." His eyes lit up like fireworks. That moment, seeing hope return to a child, was a reminder that kindness still mattered, even when the world around us was turning cold and strict. Of course, the HOA didn't like that. The next day, they left another notice saying I was encouraging rule-breaking. Imagine punishing someone for giving a child joy. But I stayed calm. I kept helping people, the way my wife would want. I fixed small things for neighbors, greeted everyone with a smile, and never showed anger, even when the HOA patrol drove by slowly, taking pictures of my home like I was a criminal. Everything changed the day the sheriff came to visit. Sheriff Dalton is a big man with a calm face and a voice that sounds like he's been through many storms in life. He came by one afternoon after hearing the HOA was harassing older residents. He asked if he could rest at my cabin for a while because he'd been having long days dealing with trouble in town. I agreed happily. My cabin has always been a place where people can breathe peacefully. The sheriff visited a few times that week, usually after work, just to sit in silence on my porch or take a short nap inside. I didn't mind. Everyone needs a safe place to rest. I didn't know then that this simple kindness, letting the sheriff use my cabin to rest, would lead to the shocking event that opened this chapter. Because that night, while the sheriff was sleeping inside and I was enjoying the quiet outside, the HOA patrol made their move. They thought I was alone. They thought I was weak. They thought breaking into my cabin would scare me. But they were wrong about everything. The night was cold, the air sharp, and the moon bright. I had just stepped inside when I heard the first knock. It wasn't a gentle knock. It was loud and angry. Wham, wham, wham! Before I could even reach the door, it flew open. Splinters flew past me. The patrol officers barged in like they owned the place. And then, just as their flashlights landed on the sheriff sleeping on my sofa, the entire room fell silent. The sheriff opened his eyes, slow and steady, like a man waking to the sound of thunder. He sat up. The patrol captain took a step back. And then the sheriff said, "Well, that is where we came in at the start, because what came next shocked them to their bones, and you will hear that in the next chapter. But right now, as this chapter closes, the sheriff has just stood up, staring down the HOA patrol, and no one in the room is breathing." The air inside my cabin felt tight, so tight that even the shadows on the walls seemed afraid to move. The sheriff's boots touched the wooden floor with a heavy thud as he stood up straight. His broad shoulders blocked the lantern light behind him, making him look even taller, even stronger, even more dangerous to the HOA patrol that had forced their way in. The tall patrol captain swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bouncing up and down like it was trying to escape his throat. The sheriff raised one eyebrow and said in a deep, slow voice, "You gentlemen better have a very good reason for breaking into this old man's home." No one answered. Not one word. Not even a breath. The smallest officer in the group, a young man who looked like he wished he had called in sick, quickly pointed his flashlight down at the floor like he didn't want any part of this. The captain opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Sheriff? Sir? We didn't know you were here." "And that makes it better?" the sheriff asked, his voice low but sharp. "No, sir, But the sheriff cut him off by taking one slow step toward them. "Do you always break into homes without knowing who's inside?" The cabin stayed silent. Only the sound of the lake outside and the wind brushing the trees dared to speak. Then the sheriff turned his head toward me and said, "Henry, did you give them permission to enter?" I shook my head. "No, Sheriff. They busted the door down like they were chasing a wild bear." The sheriff already knew the answer, but asking me showed he wasn't playing with them. It was a warning, a final chance for them to explain themselves before things got worse. The captain tried again, his voice shaking. We were conducting an inspection." "At night?" the sheriff asked. Silence. "In the middle of winter?" he asked again. Silence. "Without knocking properly? Without a warrant? Without—" The sheriff didn't get to finish that sentence, because suddenly there was a loud noise outside. A car door slammed. A bright flashlight beam swept across my broken doorway, and someone shouted from outside, "Captain! Captain! We've got a problem out here!" The sheriff turned his head slightly, and before anyone could move, the captain's radio crackled with static. Captain? We've got a situation by the lake. You need to come see this." The captain's eyes widened. The sheriff crossed his arms. And that is where the next extreme event began. But to understand why this moment was so important, why the HOA patrol was suddenly terrified, we need to step back just a little. Because earlier that same day, something strange had happened by the lake. Something that the HOA didn't want anyone to know. Something that would soon explode into a mess far bigger than a simple cabin inspection. That morning, I woke up to the sound of honking. Loud, angry honking that didn't fit in with the peaceful sound of birds and soft waves brushing the shore. When I stepped outside, I saw a fancy silver car parked crookedly near the lake. A woman in a business suit was pacing back and forth, talking loudly on her phone. "Yes, I'm trying to view the new property on Cedar Bend, but the mud here is horrible. Why isn't anyone cleaning up the lakefront? This is unacceptable." I watched her for a moment, feeling a bit sorry for her. She was clearly stressed. It wasn't her fault the HOA had been obsessively renovating the lakefront area all week. They dug up parts of the soil, blocked the walking paths, and even removed a small family of ducks that always stayed near my cabin. The woman hung up angrily, then stepped too close to a wet patch. Her heels sank into the mud and she nearly fell face first into the lake. She gasped and stumbled. I hurried over to help her. Ma'am, you okay? She sighed. This place is a mess. I'm trying to buy a home here, but everything looks like a construction site. She tried to pull her shoe from the mud. And now my shoe is stuck. I bent down, pulled gently, and freed it. She looked at me, surprised. Thank you. Henry, I said with a smile. Been living here many years. She looked around. Is this how it always is? This chaos? No, I said calmly. The HOA's been doing a lot lately. Maybe too much. She frowned. I'm supposed to meet the HOA director today. He promised me the lake area was clean and peaceful. I chuckled softly. Well, peaceful it is. Clean? They've been trying too hard. She laughed for the first time. Trying too hard. I know people like that. Before she left, she told me, Thank you, Mr. Henry. People like you make a place feel like home. It was a warm moment, one of those gentle reminders that kindness still matters, that no matter how stressful life gets, one act of help can change someone's day. I didn't know then that this woman would become part of the chaos later. I didn't know she was connected to the reason the HOA patrol panicked that night. But she was, and everything was about to get much worse. By afternoon, the lake had gone quiet again. The sheriff came by around 6 p.m. looking tired. He sat on my porch and told me he needed a quiet place to rest for an hour before his night shift. Stay as long as you need, I told him. He nodded, took off his boots, and fell asleep on the couch like a baby. I was outside splitting firewood when I noticed something strange near the lake. The HOA patrol had set up a small tent. They were talking in low voices, pointing at the water. Then I saw the patrol captain holding what looked like a thin metal device. He waved it over the water, and it beeped loudly. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured they were doing one of their silly environment tests they like to brag about. But later that evening, I heard shouting near the tent. Angry shouting. A patrol member ran toward the community gate holding a folder tightly in his hands, and the captain yelled after him, "Don't tell anyone yet! We fix this first!" Fix what? I didn't know. Not yet. But I would soon. Back to the night of the break-in. When the car door slammed outside my cabin and the officer yelled, the sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Captain," he said slowly, "you're going to show me what's going on at that lake. Right now." The captain's face went pale. He didn't want to. He desperately didn't want to, but he knew he had no choice. The sheriff grabbed his jacket from my coat hanger, nodded at me, and said, "Henry, stay behind me." We stepped outside into the cold air, and the wind chilled my face as we walked toward the lake. The patrol officers whispered nervously behind us. The closer we got, the more tension grew. When we reached the lakefront trail, the sheriff stopped. Because right in the middle of the path was a large, deep hole, a hole filled with dark, strange-looking water. And next to it was a broken metal box with wires coming out of it, half buried in mud. The sheriff stared at it. "What is this?" No one answered. He pointed at the box. I said, "What is this?" The captain froze. Then finally he spoke. It's something we weren't supposed to find. We were testing the water and, something is leaking into the lake." "What kind of something?" the sheriff asked, his voice dangerously calm. The captain looked down. "Chemicals. From the HOA's construction suppliers." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "And you tried to hide it?" he asked. The captain swallowed hard. "Sir, we planned to fix it quietly before anyone noticed, especially the new home buyers. The HOA board told us—" "Stop," the sheriff said sharply. "Do you realize this could make people sick? Kids play in this water." The captain opened his mouth to respond, but at that exact moment, a loud cracking sound echoed across the lake. The ground beneath us trembled. One of the officers shouted, "The edge is collapsing!" And before anyone could move, the muddy soil at the lake's edge broke apart. And something huge, something metal, something dangerous, started rising out of the filthy water. The sheriff grabbed my arm and pulled me back. The patrol stumbled backward in fear. The water swirled. The ground shook again. And then a massive, rusted barrel rolled out of the mud and slammed onto the shore, splashing dirty water everywhere. The sheriff stared at it with wide eyes. "What is that?" he shouted. But the captain looked like he already knew. And that's when I realized this was bigger than the HOA. Much bigger. This wasn't just about rules, or power, or my cabin. Something terrible had been hidden under our lake. And now it was coming to the surface. The sheriff turned slowly to the captain. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me exactly what you people have been hiding." The captain's lips trembled, and he whispered, "Sheriff, we think the lake is poisoned." The wind stopped. The lake fell silent. Even the trees seemed to freeze. When the captain whispered the words, "We think the lake is poisoned," it felt like the entire world suddenly held its breath. The sheriff stared at him, not blinking, not moving, just taking in every word. I could see his jaw flex, the way it always did when he was furious but trying not to explode. I felt a cold wave roll through my chest. I had lived by this lake for more than 40 years. I had fished here, swam here, taught kids to skip stones here. This lake held memories of my marriage, my children, my wife's laughter echoing after sunset. The idea that someone had poisoned it, that someone had hidden it. It was a punch to the heart. The sheriff stepped closer to the captain. "How long has this been going on?" The captain looked down like a boy caught stealing cookies. "We noticed strange readings last week. The construction company the HOA hired dumped soil into the water to create the new luxury shoreline. But some of the barrels, they must have come from them." "You're telling me," the sheriff growled, "that the HOA brought in contaminated equipment? And instead of reporting it, you tried to bury it?" The captain nodded weakly. The sheriff raised his voice. "This lake has children swimming in it during the summer. Families fish here. People drink from wells connected to this water." His anger shook the air. But before the sheriff could say more, the ground rumbled again. The mud near the broken barrel shifted, and another shape began rising. A second barrel, thinner, with faded yellow paint and warning signs that looked scratched off. I felt sickness twist in my stomach. The sheriff took a careful step back, pulling me with him. "Don't touch it. Don't go near it." One of the younger officers panicked, stumbling backward and dropping his flashlight. The beam hit the water and revealed a thick, oily film floating on the surface. It shimmered in the moonlight, swirling like something alive. "What have you people done?" the sheriff whispered, almost to himself. The captain wiped sweat from his forehead. We didn't know it was this bad." "You didn't want to know," the sheriff snapped. "There's a difference." The other patrolmen shifted nervously. Some whispered under their breath. One looked ready to run. But then, something else happened. Something none of us expected. From the bushes near the lake, a small voice shouted, "Mr. Henry!" I turned sharply, and my heart dropped. Little Tommy, the boy with the wooden boat, stood there holding a tiny flashlight, his winter jacket zipped up to his chin, his boots muddy like he'd been running. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his breath puffed out in small clouds. "Tommy?" I gasped. "What are you doing out here at night?" He pointed at the lake. "I came to get my boat. It drifted off during the day and... Then he finally took a good look at the scene. The barrels, the patrol officers, the sheriff, the strange water. His face went pale. The sheriff turned to me sharply. "Henry, get him back! Away from this area!" I rushed over to Tommy and pulled him close. But the boy wasn't scared for himself. He was scared for the lake. "Mr. Henry," he whispered shakily, "is the lake sick?" His question hit me harder than any shouting or accusations. Kids always see the truth faster than adults. I knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Go home, Tommy. I'll explain everything tomorrow." He nodded, but before he could turn away, the patrol captain blurted out, "He shouldn't be here. That kid could be contaminated." The sheriff's head snapped toward him. "You speak about him like he's trash one more time," the sheriff warned, "and I will throw you into this lake." The captain's face lost all color. Tommy held my arm tighter. Then the sheriff added, "Children are the ones we protect first. Always." For a moment, everyone went quiet. This was a low moment, a softer moment, a moment that reminded me why we must never stop caring. No matter how messy life gets, kindness must never die. I walked Tommy partway back toward the trail. One of the kinder patrol members followed us to make sure he got home safely. The boy looked back at me 3 times before disappearing down the path. When I returned to the lakeside, the sheriff was kneeling near the barrel, examining the mud without touching it. The captain stood nervously behind him. Then the sheriff asked a question that changed everything. "Where are the rest of the barrels?" The captain's lips trembled. We're not sure." Not sure. Those words chilled me. Not because of what they meant, but because of what they didn't say. The sheriff stood up slowly. "Get your entire HOA board down here, now!" The captain swallowed. "Sheriff, at this hour?" "Now!" the sheriff repeated sharply. That was when the patrol radios began crackling again. Captain, we found something else." "What is it?" the captain asked nervously. "It's another hole, sir, a bigger one, near the west dock." The captain froze. So did I. So did the sheriff. And then the officer added words that echoed through the cold night like a warning from the sky. "Sir, something big is buried in the water. We don't know what it is, but it's moving. Moving. Something big, buried, in the water." The sheriff turned toward the west side of the lake, his eyes narrowing, his hand moving slowly toward his holster. "Henry," he said to me, "stay behind me again." We began walking toward the west dock. The patrol followed, shaking, whispering, stumbling. The moon was our only light. The lake was silent. The air grew colder with every step. And then we saw it. Near the west dock, the water was rising and falling, like something underneath was pushing upward. The shore had cracked open. Mud bubbled like the lake was boiling. The sheriff raised his flashlight and pointed it at the water. And then, something huge began to emerge from beneath the surface. First a metal corner, then an entire rusted panel, then a thick, rounded shape. The patrol captain gasped, stepping backward. The sheriff whispered, "Dear Lord," because rising out of the dark, filthy water was the top of a massive, old military-grade storage tank, half buried, half broken, and very much real. I stepped closer, my hands shaking. The sheriff stared at it in disbelief. "You told me this was just barrels," he said. The captain couldn't speak. His breath hitched. His eyes were wide with fear. "No," the sheriff whispered. "This isn't from construction. This is decades old." He turned to the captain sharply. "How long has this been down there?" The captain stuttered. We didn't know, Sheriff. We found signs 2 days ago. But the HOA board said... They said to keep quiet until... "Stop talking!" the sheriff barked. The lake bubbled louder. Something groaned beneath the water, deep and metallic. Something old, something dangerous. Something that should not have been buried under our peaceful lake. The sheriff grabbed my shoulder and whispered urgently, "Henry, I need you to go home. Now." I shook my head. "Sheriff, I'm staying. I'm not leaving you alone with..." He didn't get to argue, because at that exact moment, there was a loud crack. The tank shifted. The water exploded upward, and something broke loose, rolling toward us with terrible speed. A gigantic metal hatch tore off the tank, flying straight toward the sheriff and me. The giant metal hatch flew toward us so fast that all I saw at first was a blur of rust and darkness. The sheriff grabbed my arm and yanked me to the side with a strength I didn't think a man his age could still have. The hatch slammed into the ground where we had been standing just a second earlier, hitting with a metal boom so loud it shook my bones. The patrol officers screamed and scattered like frightened birds. One tripped in the mud, another fell backward trying to run, and the captain froze entirely, eyes wide, mouth open, legs shaking. The sheriff pulled me behind a tree stump. "Stay low, Henry." Water splashed everywhere. Mud flew into the air. The tank beneath the lake groaned like some ancient giant waking up after years of sleep. The sound was deep and awful, like something heavy tearing through the earth. "What is happening?" I shouted over the noise. The sheriff didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the lake, watching as bubbles rose faster and faster, as if the water was boiling from below. The metal tank shifted again, cracked again, and then slowly, almost painfully, it began to rise, not fully, not completely, but enough for us to see its size. It was enormous, bigger than any storage tank I'd ever seen. Old army green paint clung to its sides, scratched and faded. Thick cables hung from it like dead snakes. A broken warning sign floated near the surface, too waterlogged to read. One of the younger patrolmen screamed, "We're all gonna die!" The sheriff snapped, Calm down. Nobody is dying tonight. But the truth was, the sheriff didn't know that. None of us did. The tank groaned again, and a wave splashed so hard against the shore that it nearly knocked me off my feet. The sheriff raised his flashlight. "Everyone back! Move away from the shoreline!" The captain finally snapped out of his frozen state and yelled, "Everyone, fall back! Fall back now!" The patrol officers scrambled backwards, slipping, tripping, dropping flashlights, but something about the movement of the tank felt wrong. Very wrong. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "That tank isn't rising on its own." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's being lifted." I felt my stomach twist. Lifted? By what? The sheriff didn't get to explain, because right then, a huge metal cable shot up out of the water, then another, then another. They wrapped around the tank like long, dark vines. The sheriff and I stared in shock. Those were no natural vines. They were cables, thick ones, still attached to something buried deeper under the lake. The sheriff whispered, "This isn't just a tank. This looks like a whole underground structure." But before we could say more, a new voice cut through the night. "Sheriff Dalton?" We turned sharply. An older man in a suit, wet, angry, and panting, came stumbling down the path with two other well-dressed HOA board members behind him. It was Mr. Graham, the HOA president. His silver hair was plastered to his forehead, his suit covered in mud, his shoes ruined by the wet ground. But even in that miserable state, he still carried himself like a man who believed he was more important than everyone else. The sheriff stood up straight. "Graham, you better have answers." Graham raised a shaky finger. "Sheriff, you have no authority here. This is a private HOA matter." The sheriff's voice turned ice cold. "A private matter? You idiot! There are toxic barrels leaking into a public lake." "That lake belongs to the HOA," Graham snapped. "No lake belongs to anyone," the sheriff shouted back. "But even if it did, you do not get to poison it, hide it, then break into Henry's cabin." Graham opened his mouth to argue, but then the tank groaned again. A loud shriek of metal echoed over the water. Everyone froze. The sheriff moved protectively in front of me. The cables tightened. The lake bubbled violently. Then, in one loud, monstrous heave, the tank jerked upward another 2 feet. The patrol captain yelled, "Sheriff, look! The ground by the dock! It's cracking!" I turned. The wooden planks of the dock were splitting apart. Water gushed up through the cracks. Mud swallowed the lower posts. The sheriff grabbed my arm again. "Henry, move!" We stumbled back toward higher ground as the dock began collapsing into the lake piece by piece. The sound was awful, like the bones of the earth snapping in half. Graham shouted at his board members, "Don't let the sheriff near that tank! He has no right to—" But he didn't finish, because in that exact moment, the west dock completely gave way. It broke apart and sank into the water in a massive splash, sending waves rolling onto the shore like the lake was roaring. The tank tilted, the cables tightened again, and suddenly, lights appeared in the distance, bright ones, headlights, coming fast down the old dirt road. Everyone stared. The sheriff squinted. "Who is that?" The vehicle sped closer. The engine roared. Mud flew from under its tires. Then, a large black pickup truck slid to a stop near the lake. The driver jumped out. And when I saw his face, my heart nearly stopped. It was the man who came earlier that morning. Not just any man. A federal environmental agent. I recognized him instantly. The same man who had quietly asked me questions about the HOA weeks ago. The same man who said he was just looking around. But tonight, he didn't come quietly. He slammed his truck door and shouted, "Nobody move! This area is now under federal investigation." The sheriff blinked. "Feds? Since when?" The agent held up a badge, his voice booming. "We've been tracking illegal chemical dumping across 3 counties, and thanks to what surfaced tonight," he pointed at the rising tank, "we just found the biggest crime scene of them all." Graham turned ghost white. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding. The HOA has nothing to do with—" The agent cut him off sharply. "Save it. We already have documents." The HOA board members froze. The officers stared. The sheriff looked stunned. "Documents?" he asked. The agent nodded. "Paper trails connecting the HOA board to an illegal disposal contract from 13 years ago. 13 years. My chest tightened. Memory hit me hard. 13 years ago. That was right before my dear wife died. Right before the HOA first came. Right when their lake improvement project began. The sheriff turned slowly toward Graham. "You poisoned my town," he said softly. "You poisoned our water. Our lake. And you think you can talk your way out of this?" Graham stepped back. I didn't sign anything." The agent reached into his coat, pulled out a file, then he dropped it at Graham's feet. "I think you did." Graham stared at the papers with shaking hands. Then, more headlights appeared behind the first truck. 3 more federal vehicles, all heading toward the ruined lake. The patrol captain whispered, "We're finished." The other officers whispered, panicked. The tank groaned louder, rising another inch. The sheriff stood tall. The agent stepped forward. The lake bubbled. The cables tightened. Something big was about to happen. Then the agent shouted, "Sheriff, get everyone back! The pressure in that tank is rising. It could—" But none of us heard what he was about to say. Because that moment, the enormous tank jerked violently, and a blast of steaming air exploded into the night sky. A deep rumble shook the earth. The sheriff shoved me behind him. The lake erupted, and the tank began to rupture. The night exploded with sound. A deep, heavy boom thundered across Lake Pinewood as a jet of burning steam shot out of the rupturing tank. The blast lit up the darkness like a lightning strike, spraying hot water and mud into the air. The ground trembled under our feet. Birds burst out of the trees in panic, crying into the night sky. The sheriff threw his arm across my chest to shield me. "Get down, Henry!" I dropped to my knees as the sheriff pushed my head low. The federal agent dove behind his truck. The HOA patrol scrambled like frightened ants, slipping in mud, tumbling over each other. The HOA board members screamed and ducked behind bushes. Another explosive crack followed as the tank's side split open, releasing a thick cloud of steam that smelled like metal, acid, and something old. Something rotten. The cables snapped one by one. Twang, 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 flying into the air like angry whips. One cut across a tree trunk, slicing off branches like they were nothing but soft bread. The sheriff shouted, "Everyone stay down! Don't inhale the steam!" I held my breath as long as I could, covering my mouth with my sleeve. The tank heaved again, groaned again, sank slightly, then tilted forward. The agent yelled from behind his truck, "Sheriff, if the pressure builds any further, it could—" He stopped, because something unexpected happened. The groaning slowed, the shaking quieted, the bubbling at the shoreline softened. Then, the tank stopped moving. Just like that, the lake fell silent again. A smoky cloud drifted low over the water. The breeze pushed it toward the trees, away from us. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody dared breathe. The sheriff slowly stood to his feet, keeping one hand on his holster. "Everyone stay calm. The worst of the pressure may have released." The captain crawled out from under a bush, shaking. "Did it explode?" "Not fully," the sheriff said. "But this isn't over." The federal agent stood, dusting mud off his jacket. He approached the tank carefully. "We need to secure this area. That thing is a contaminated relic, possibly from military testing decades ago. The HOA had no business interfering with it." Graham, the HOA president, stood up trembling. This wasn't the HOA's fault. These barrels, this tank, these weren't on any of our maps. We couldn't have known." The agent stared at him coldly. "You forged approval documents for lake renovations. You paid off contractors to bury waste. You denied environmental reports. And now look." He pointed to the lake. The dark, swirling water reflected the moonlight like a cracked mirror. "You turned a peaceful community into a danger zone." Graham took a shaky breath. "But we—" "Enough," the sheriff said. "You are finished talking." The federal agent took out handcuffs. "Mr. Graham, you're under arrest for obstruction, illegal dumping, falsifying documents, and endangering public safety." Graham gasped. "You can't arrest me! I'm the HOA president! The agent clicked the cuffs around his wrists. "You're a criminal." Two board members tried to run. "Stop!" the sheriff yelled. The patrol captain grabbed one. Another officer tackled the other into the mud. I watched from where I stood, my heart heavy. This lake had been my home, my sanctuary. Seeing it hurt like this, seeing it poisoned and torn apart, it felt like losing a family member. But the worst part wasn't the tank, or the barrels, or the lying HOA board. It was thinking about the children, Tommy and others, who had played in this water, who had splashed here, who had sailed tiny wooden boats across the surface. My chest tightened painfully. What if the water made them sick? What if they were already affected? What if my kindness letting Tommy play here put him in danger? The sheriff stepped beside me, noticing my expression. "Henry, don't blame yourself." I didn't answer. My throat was tight. "This isn't on you," he said softly. "You didn't poison anything. They did." I nodded slowly, but it still hurt. The federal agent walked toward us. "Sheriff, we need to evacuate homes within a mile of the lake until the contamination level is measured." "What?" I asked, surprised. Evacuate everyone? For safety, the agent said. It's temporary, but the lake may not be safe. The chemicals could spread underground. Fear punched me in the stomach. Are you saying... I swallowed hard. I have to leave my cabin? The sheriff placed a hand on my shoulder. Just until they declare it safe. My cabin. My home. The one I built with my own hands. The place where I raised my kids. The place where Lily and I danced on the porch. The place where I'd lived my whole life. The idea of leaving, even for a short time, felt like someone squeezing my heart. I don't want to go, I whispered. The sheriff sighed. I know, Henry, I know. But the agent was firm. Everyone will be relocated for now. We can't risk exposure. More federal trucks arrived. Men in protective gear stepped out, carrying equipment, scanning machines, and containment tools. They quarantined the area around the lake with yellow hazard tape. The patrol officers were pushed back. The sheriff helped escort some of the older residents away from their porches. The HOA board was rounded up. The night grew colder. And soon, a federal worker approached me directly. Sir, he said kindly, we'll need you to pack a bag. You must leave this home for now. My heart dropped. Leave? Tonight? I looked back at my cabin, its warm lantern still glowing, its porch rocking chair swaying in the breeze, its memories shining through the windows like old ghosts waving goodbye. The worker added gently, just for now, only until we know more. My throat tightened. This cabin, this is all I have left. He looked at me with genuine sympathy. We know, sir. We'll help you pack. But before I could answer, before I could even move, a loud scream echoed from the main road. Everyone turned. A flashlight beam swung wildly, and a panicked voice shouted, "The road is blocked! The ground is sinking!" The sheriff spun around. What now? The federal agent pulled out his radio. Where? Which road? The voice shouted again. The main entrance road! It's collapsing into a pit! The sheriff didn't hesitate. Henry, stay here. I need to check. No, I said, standing straight despite the fear. I'm coming with you. He opened his mouth to argue, but the urgency overpowered everything. We rushed toward the entrance road with the agent and several officers. The ground shook again. A new crack split across the dirt. And when we reached the entrance, my breath left my body, because the road, the only way in and out of the lake community, was breaking apart into a deep sinkhole. Trees leaned sideways, street lamps flickered, pavement crumbled into darkness, and standing dangerously close to the edge was little Tommy, crying, calling for someone. Mr. Henry, Sheriff, help! And that is the extreme moment where Chapter 5 ends. The road collapsing, the boy in danger, the lake poisoned, the community falling apart. Tommy, don't move! The sheriff shouted. But the boy was already wobbling on the cracked edge of the collapsing road, his small boots slipping on loose gravel. The sinkhole was widening, slowly at first, but every rumble made the ground crumble more. Dirt and chunks of pavement broke off and tumbled into the dark pit below, disappearing without a sound. My heart punched my ribs. Tommy! He cried harder when he saw me. Mr. Henry, I can't get back! The ground keeps breaking! The sheriff rushed forward, but the federal agent grabbed his arm. Dalton, stop! The entire ground is unstable. If you run out there, you'll fall in. I don't care, the sheriff barked, shaking him off. That boy is not dying tonight. But one more step forward, and the earth groaned. A deep, sickening sound like something underneath was pulling the world downward. A large crack shot across the road, splitting it like a lightning bolt. The sheriff froze, his boots sliding slightly. The agent cursed under his breath. This is from the underground structure shifting. The tank moved the soil layers. Everything around the lake is unstable. But none of that mattered to me. All I cared about was Tommy. His tiny hands trembled. His eyes were wide and full of fear. Mr. Henry, I'm scared. I stepped forward instinctively. Henry, stop, the sheriff warned. It's too dangerous. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Tommy needed me. I took another step, feeling the dirt shift under my boot. Tommy, listen to me, I said gently. Look right at me. Don't look down. Don't look behind you. Just keep your eyes on me. He sniffed, nodding. Oh, okay. You're going to take one small step toward me, I said, inching forward. Just one. You can do it. He lifted his foot, but the ground cracked again. A chunk of dirt slipped under him. He screamed. No! I shouted. Without thinking, the sheriff lunged beside me, grabbing my jacket and anchoring me as I stretched my arm toward Tommy. Sheriff, hold me! I yelled. I've got you! He growled, digging his boots deep into the soil. Tommy slid forward slightly, pebbles scattering into the pit. Reach, Tommy! I shouted, stretching my arm farther than I thought a 72-year-old arm could go. Take my hand! He tried, his little fingers brushing mine, but he slipped again, falling to his knees. The sheriff tightened his grip on my jacket. Henry, don't you dare fall in. I'm not letting him go, I shouted back. Tommy cried harder. Mr. Henry, help me. You're going to grab me, I insisted, my voice shaking. Right now, don't think. Just take my hand. He reached again. This time I lunged forward with my whole body and grabbed his wrist. I've got you, I cried, but the moment our hands locked, the ground under Tommy gave way completely. His legs dropped into the hole. Ah! He screamed as the pit tried to swallow him. I held on with every bit of strength left in my old bones. Sheriff, pull us! The sheriff braced his legs and pulled back with a grunt that shook the air. Hold on, Henry. The dirt crumbled. My boots slipped. Tommy dangled over the dark pit. Don't let go! He screamed. I won't! I shouted, feeling my shoulder burn from the strain. The sheriff dragged us backward inch by inch. The sinkhole tried to fight us, sucking more soil down. My fingers started to slip from sweating. My arms shook violently. Tommy sobbed, shaking like a leaf. Then the sheriff planted both feet, leaned back with all his force, and roared, Pull! With one massive yank, Tommy flew into my chest. I grabbed him with both arms as the sheriff hauled us onto solid ground. We tumbled back in a heap of mud, breathing hard, shaking uncontrollably. Tommy clung to me like a terrified kitten. Mr. Henry, I thought I was gonna die. I hugged him tightly. Not on my watch. Never on my watch. The sheriff panted, hands on his knees. That was too close. The federal agent sprinted over. Is he hurt? Tommy shook his head into my chest. No, but I'm scared. That's allowed, the sheriff said gently. The agent pointed at the sinkhole. Nobody goes near that again. We need to call in engineers and emergency responders. The underground structure is collapsing from multiple points. The sheriff wiped his face. This lake is a disaster zone. Graham, still handcuffed and covered in mud, looked horrified. This wasn't supposed to happen. The company told us the tanks were sealed. They told us burying them wouldn't... The agent snapped. Burying them is illegal regardless. And now your entire community is falling apart. The ground rumbled again, softer this time, but enough to remind us the danger wasn't over. I held Tommy and whispered, "Are your parents home?" He sniffled. "My mom is. My dad is on a night shift. We need to get him home," I told the sheriff. "I'll drive him myself," the sheriff said, standing tall again. But before he could touch the boy, Tommy shook his head and buried his face deeper in my shirt. "I want Mr. Henry." My heart softened. "I'll ride with you." The sheriff nodded. "All right, let's go." But then, a new voice shouted from farther down the road. "Sheriff, come quick! You need to see this!" Another patrol officer ran toward us, panic in his eyes. The sheriff muttered, "What now?" The officer pointed toward the cabins on the east side of the lake. "The ground isn't just sinking. Sir, the shoreline is shifting." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Shifting how?" The officer swallowed hard. "Like something underneath is pulling the soil inward." The agent cursed again. "The underground structure must be bigger than we thought." "Bigger?" I asked softly. "How big?" The agent looked at me with grim eyes. "Possibly a full buried facility, not just a tank." I felt the world tilt. A buried facility? Under our lake? For how long? The sheriff said, "Show us." We followed the officer down the road. Tommy clung to me the whole time, his small fingers gripping the back of my jacket. As we turned the corner, I saw what the officer meant. The shoreline near the east cabins had moved inward. Trees that used to stand at the edge of the lake were now tilted forward, half swallowed by water. A wooden fence had collapsed into the mud. The water line had crept several feet closer to the homes, like the lake was eating the land. "What is causing this?" the sheriff asked. The agent took out a scanner device. It beeped loudly. "There's a void beneath the soil, something hollow, something collapsing." "A tunnel?" the sheriff asked. "A bunker," the agent said. My breath caught. A bunker under our lake? The agent continued. "If the ground keeps weakening, parts of this community could fall straight down into it." Tommy buried his face in my chest again. The sheriff ran his hands through his hair. "We need to evacuate everyone. Now." But before he could give the order, a chilling scream cut through the night, coming from one of the cabins near the shifting shoreline. A woman's voice. "Help! Please! Somebody help!" Flames lit up inside her cabin. A fire. The sheriff raced toward it. The agent followed. I hugged Tommy tighter, knowing the fear was far from over, because the ground was collapsing. The lake was poisoned. The cabins were at risk, and now a cabin was burning. The scream tore through the night like lightning ripping open the sky. "Help! Fire! Please! Help me!" The sheriff didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the burning cabin with a speed I didn't think a man his age could manage. The flames inside the wooden home glowed bright orange, flickering wildly behind the windows like angry, hungry creatures. Smoke poured out through the cracks in the roof, thick and black, rising into the cold night air. "Agent, call the fire department!" the sheriff shouted. The federal agent was already on it. "On the line! Dispatch is sending multiple units, but the nearest station is 20 minutes out." 20 minutes. That was too long. Way too long. The sheriff reached the front door and kicked it once, but the heat blasted him back. Sparks flew in his face. He stumbled, shielding his eyes. "Somebody's inside!" he yelled. "We need to get in!" Tommy clung to my leg, shaking like a leaf. "Mr. Henry? Is she gonna die?" I crouched, even as fear churned inside me. "Not if we can help her, Tommy. Stay behind me." The cabin crackled loudly, the wood snapping like bones under pressure. The roof beams groaned, strained by fire. A window shattered from the heat, spraying glass into the yard. The sheriff tried the back entrance, shouting, "Ma'am! Ma'am, where are you?" A voice inside cried back, choking through smoke. I'm stuck! My leg! Please!" My heart clenched. The sheriff covered his mouth with his sleeve. "We're coming!" The agent grabbed him. "Sheriff! You can't go in alone! You'll pass out from the smoke!" "Then help me!" the sheriff growled. They both moved toward the entrance again, but the fire roared louder and hotter. The agent cursed under his breath. "We need something to break through the side wall," he said. My old eyes looked around and spotted what we needed. A heavy metal canoe rack. Strong, solid, leaning near a neighbor's porch. "Sheriff! Agent!" I yelled. "Use that rack to break in!" The sheriff turned and nodded. "Good eye, Henry." They rushed over, grabbed the rack together, lifted it, and swung it like a battering ram. Crash! They hit the side wall. Again. Wham! The wood cracked but didn't give way. Again. Wham! This time the wall splintered open, creating a small hole, then a larger one as they hit it one more time. Smoke billowed out. The heat punched forward like a blast furnace. The sheriff dropped the rack and pulled off his jacket. "I'm going in." The agent grabbed his arm again. "Dalton, wait, you'll burn." But the sheriff shook him off. "Not while someone is begging for their life." My chest tightened with worry. "Sheriff!" He stepped to the hole, crouched low, pulled his collar over his mouth and crawled inside. "Sheriff!" I yelled. Tommy tugged my sleeve, terrified. "Is he gonna die?" "No," I said, though my voice cracked. "He's too stubborn for that." Inside the cabin, we heard the sheriff coughing hard. The smoke was dense, swirling like a black storm. Flames licked up the inside walls. The heat shimmered through the air. "Ma'am," he yelled, "keep talking so I can follow your voice." Her answer came weakly. I can't breathe." "Hold on!" the sheriff shouted. The agent paced outside anxiously. "Come on. Dalton, come on." Another loud crack shook the cabin. The agent cursed. "The roof beam is splitting. If it falls, it'll crush both of them." My heart thudded painfully. Inside the cabin, the sheriff's voice shouted, "I've got her! I've got—" Crack! The ceiling beam snapped with a terrible sound. The agent shouted, "Get out! Both of you! Get out now!" A second later, the sheriff crawled toward the hole, dragging a woman in her 60s, coughing violently, her hair singed, one leg pulled behind her, but the beam above them tilted and began to fall. "Move!" I yelled instinctively. The sheriff lunged forward with the last of his strength. The agent grabbed the woman by her arms and pulled her out. I grabbed the sheriff's jacket and yanked him the final few inches. Boom! The beam crashed down right behind him, hitting the floor where he'd been crawling one heartbeat earlier. We all rolled into the grass, coughing, heaving, gasping for air as the cabin roared behind us. The woman sobbed. "My leg. I thought I was going to die." "You're safe," the sheriff wheezed. "You're safe now." He collapsed onto his side, coughing so hard his whole body shook. I held his shoulder. "Sheriff, breathe slowly." The agent helped the injured woman up. "We need to get her to the med tent, now." Two federal responders approached with masks and blankets. They gently picked up the woman, wrapping her in a thermal sheet, carrying her toward the staging area. The sheriff finally caught enough breath to stand again, though he wobbled. "Henry, check on Tommy." I looked down. Tommy was crying quietly. Not loud, just soft, scared tears that came after the danger passed. I lifted him up and hugged him close. "It's okay, son," I whispered. "You're safe now." He buried his face in my shoulder. "I thought everyone was gonna die." I rubbed his back. "Not tonight." The sheriff steadied himself and looked at the blazing cabin. "What caused it?" he asked. The federal agent shook his head. "Could be the ground shifting under the electrical lines, or chemicals from the lake seeping up. We won't know until we inspect it." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "This whole place is falling apart." And he was right. The lake was poisoned. The ground was unstable. Homes were catching fire. Sinkholes were opening up. People were terrified. And the night wasn't done yet. Because just when we thought things couldn't get worse, a patrol officer ran toward us again. Not panicked, not crying, but pale, ghost white. "Sheriff," he said, barely breathing. "You need to come see this." The sheriff frowned. "What now?" It's the underground bunker." The agent's head snapped toward him. "What about it?" The officer swallowed. "You need to see it yourself. There's something inside it." The sheriff stiffened. "Inside?" The officer nodded. "A door opened, or something opened it." The agent grabbed his scanner. "Lead me there." "I can't," the officer whispered. "Why?" the sheriff asked. The officer shivered. "Because whatever opened that door is still down there." The sheriff put Tommy behind me. "Henry, keep the boy close." My heart pounded. The night seemed darker. The lake seemed quieter. The air felt heavier. "Show us," the sheriff said. The officer pointed toward the far shoreline. And that's when the federal agent said the words that tied a knot in my stomach. "If something is alive down there, God help us." The night felt colder the moment the patrol officer said those words. Something opened the bunker door, and whatever did it is still down there. A hush fell over everyone. Even the crackling of the burning cabin behind us seemed to fade into silence. The sheriff straightened his back, wiped soot from his forehead, and locked eyes with the frightened officer. "Show me," he ordered. The officer shook his head. "Sheriff, I'm not going alone." The sheriff nodded. "Fine. We all go." He turned to the federal agent. "Bring your scanner and protective team." The agent called in 2 more federal responders to join us. They wore thick boots and carried heavy flashlights, their faces already tense. The sheriff walked over to me. "Henry, stay with Tommy. Keep him close." But Tommy grabbed my sleeve tighter. "No, Mr. Henry, please don't leave me again. I'm scared." I knelt in front of him. "Tommy, listen to me. You are safe with the federal med team. They'll keep you warm and fed." He shook his head violently. "I don't want to go with them. I want to stay with you. You saved me." My heart softened, aching for the boy. But the sheriff placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Henry, bring him. Keep him beside you, but stay behind the group." Tommy exhaled shakily. I nodded. "All right, he stays with me." The sheriff gave a small nod, then motioned the patrol officer forward. "Lead the way." We walked along the shoreline toward the eastern side of the lake. The mud squelched under our boots. The moonlight shimmered off the water. Except now, small ripples formed patterns that didn't look natural, like something was moving underneath. The federal agent whispered, "The underground void stretches farther than expected. Be careful." The officer led us through a patch of leaning trees until we reached a jagged opening in the ground, a place where the earth had split open like a wound. The air smelled different here, metallic, damp, and cold, much colder than the rest of the forest. Tommy clung to my side, holding my hand with both of his. The officer pointed a shaking finger. "Down there. That's where we saw it." The sheriff raised his flashlight, and there it was. A massive metal structure buried beneath the lake. The top was exposed now after the ground shifts, like the lid of a long-lost underground chamber. A round hatch on the side had been forced open. Not blown open, not rusted through. Forced. The metal was bent outward from the inside, like something strong, unimaginably strong. Shoved it open. My breath caught. "Good Lord." The sheriff stepped closer. "Agent, give me a reading." The federal agent scanned the open hatch. The device beeped rapidly, high-pitched, frantic. "What does that mean?" the sheriff asked. The agent's face tightened. "Movement, heat signatures, but not human." The sheriff swore under his breath. Could it be an animal trapped inside all these years? The agent shook his head slowly. An animal wouldn't bend steel like that. A cold chill crawled up my back. Tommy squeezed my hand. "Mr. Henry, I don't like this." I rubbed his back gently. "It's okay. We're standing far away." But truthfully, even I felt like something was watching us. The sheriff called out into the darkness of the hatch. "Hello? Anyone down there? This is Sheriff Dalton. If you're hurt, we can help." The lake answered with silence. The trees answered with silence. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then, something moved inside the bunker. A slow scrape, metal against metal, soft, but heavy. Everyone froze. The federal agent raised his scanner. It beeped wildly. "There's something inside," he whispered. "Something big." The sheriff stepped back. "Everyone get behind me." Tommy's nails dug into my palm. The boy was shaking so hard I could feel his heartbeat through his hands. Another scrape echoed from inside, then a dull thud, then another, like footsteps, heavy footsteps, but muffled, as if something was testing the ground. The sheriff whispered, "It's coming toward the entrance." The patrol officer backed away. "Sheriff, maybe we should go. Maybe this thing shouldn't come out." "No," the sheriff said firmly. "Whatever is down there, we need to know what it is." The agent lifted a hand. "Sheriff, wait." But it was too late. A sound reverberated through the bunker, a deep, low groan. Not human, not animal, something in between, something that didn't belong in a quiet lakeside community. The hatch creaked, dust fell around it. The metal bent a little further. The sheriff whispered, "Henry, take Tommy back. Now." I grabbed Tommy gently. "Come on, boy. Let's move." But Tommy wouldn't budge. His eyes were wide, fixed, afraid. Then he whispered something that chilled me deeper than the cold wind. "Mr. Henry, something down there is crying." I froze. "What did you say?" He shook. "I heard crying, like someone sad, really sad." The sheriff overheard. "Crying?" We all listened. At first, nothing. Then slowly, a soft sound rose from inside the bunker. A low whimper, not loud, not fierce, sad, lonely, broken. The agent lowered his scanner. "Sheriff, this doesn't match any known animal or recorded sound we've studied." The sheriff stepped closer. "There might be someone trapped, maybe for decades." The agent grabbed him. "Sheriff, no! We don't know what's inside." But the sheriff shook him off. "Sad crying doesn't come from monsters." He leaned closer to the hatch. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. My instincts screamed for us to leave. Yet something about that cry pulled at my heart. Tommy whispered, "It sounds like a person." And then, without warning, a hand shot out of the bunker. Not a claw, not a beast's limb. A hand. Human-shaped, but pale. Too pale, and thin like it hadn't seen sunlight for years. The sheriff jumped back and drew his gun. The agent stumbled away in shock. The hand grasped the dirt, pulled itself forward. The sheriff shouted, "Everyone back!" The agent yelled into his radio, "We have a live subject, I repeat. Something is emerging." Tommy screamed and buried his face into my jacket. I held him tight, because slowly, terrifyingly slowly, a figure began to crawl out of the darkness. A person, or what was left of one. The body was thin, fragile, bones visible under the skin, clothes ragged, hair long and tangled. But the worst part, its eyes. They glowed faintly in the dark. Not evil, not angry, just empty and lost. The sheriff lowered his gun, stunned. "Dear Lord, who are you?" The figure lifted its head, and then, in a cracked, broken whisper, it spoke. "Please, Don't. Let them bury me again. Everyone froze. The agent whispered, horrified, "Sheriff, this person was alive in that bunker." But the sheriff looked closer, his eyes widening as recognition washed over his face. "Wait," he whispered. "Is that—" He stepped forward, shock gripping him. "No, it can't be." His voice cracked. "That person was declared dead 15 years ago." The world around us seemed to freeze when the sheriff whispered those words. That person was declared dead 15 years ago. For a moment, nobody breathed. The sheriff stepped slowly toward the trembling figure crawling out of the bunker. The pale person lifted their head, shivering violently, their thin arms struggling to hold their weight. Their hair hung in dirty tangles down their face, and their clothes were rags, barely covering their frail body. Tommy clung to my leg so tightly I could feel his small fingers shaking. I wrapped an arm around him, my own heart beating too fast for my age. The sheriff crouched slightly, pointing the flashlight at the figure's face, careful not to blind them. Then he gasped. "Elliot?" I blinked. "Sheriff, who is Elliot?" The sheriff swallowed painfully. "Elliot Granger. He was a young environmental researcher. He disappeared 15 years ago while investigating strange activity around this lake." The federal agent stiffened. "Elliot Granger? The whistleblower who tried to expose illegal dumping? We thought he fled the state." The sheriff shook his head slowly. "No, we searched everywhere for him. His car was found near the old East Trail, abandoned, and then the HOA took over. They said they'd handle the investigation and hired private teams to search the forest." My stomach twisted. The HOA handled his disappearance? The sheriff clenched his jaw. "They claimed they found nothing. Case closed." But now, Elliot Granger, frail, starved, shaking, was crawling out of a poisoned underground bunker that had been hidden beneath our lake. The young man looked up at us, his voice weak, trembling, cracking like the voice of someone who hadn't spoken in years. You have to listen," he whispered. Don't trust them." The sheriff stepped closer. "Elliot? It's me, Sheriff Dalton. You're safe now." But Elliot shook his head violently, his limbs trembling. No, nobody is safe. They put me there." The agent frowned. "Who?" "Elliot. Who locked you in the bunker?" His eyes, those faint, eerie, glowing eyes, filled with tears. "The HOA board," he whispered. They found out what I discovered. About the chemicals. About the lake. About the contracts." He choked. "They said I'd ruin everything. They said I didn't understand what was at stake." My heart dropped. The sheriff closed his eyes as if fighting the urge to explode with rage. Elliot continued, voice shaking like broken glass. "They forced me into that bunker. They said nobody would believe me, that nobody would ever find me." The federal agent clenched his fists. "Dear God!" Elliot coughed violently. The sound echoed across the trees. Tommy hid his face against my jacket and I gently stroked his back. "It's all right, son. It's all right." But the trembling researcher lifted his hand weakly. "They lied. They all lied. And now the lake The whole lake. The chemicals are mixing, changing. The soil is collapsing. And the bunker. His voice dropped to a frightened whisper. There are more rooms. Farther down. And something is still down there with me. A cold wave rolled through my chest. The agent stepped closer. What do you mean, something? What did you see? But Elliot didn't answer right away. He looked back over his shoulder, toward the dark hole he had crawled from, as if terrified it would open again. His voice broke. I wasn't alone in the dark. The sheriff asked softly, Who else was there? Elliot whispered, I don't know. But it moved. It breathed. It talked sometimes. His whole body shivered. I thought it was human, but it never showed itself. The agent's scanner beeped rapidly again. Sheriff, something still inside that bunker is emitting heat. High heat. And it's moving. The sheriff stepped back. We need backup down here now. The agent grabbed his radio. Dispatch! We need immediate reinforcement at the east shoreline. We have a live recovered victim and multiple unidentified signatures inside a collapsed bunker. As he spoke, Elliot suddenly grabbed the sheriff's sleeve with trembling fingers. No, you can't. You can't open it. It's dangerous. The sheriff touched his arm gently. Elliot, listen to me. Whatever's down there, we'll handle it. But right now, we need to get you medical attention. Elliot shook his head again. They didn't just bury tanks. They buried people. My breath caught. The agent froze mid-step. The sheriff looked stricken. People? What do you mean, people? Elliot's voice cracked. Each word weighted with years of trauma. I heard voices in the walls, scratching, crying, some nights, banging, like they wanted out. Tommy whimpered softly, and I tightened my hold on him. The sheriff stood slowly. You're telling me the HOA buried more than waste? They buried living people? Elliot nodded weakly. They were witnesses, workers, anyone who knew too much. The sheriff turned toward the handcuffed HOA president, Graham, who was being held several yards away under federal watch. And that's when we heard it. A sound rising out of the bunker. Not crying, not scratching, not footsteps, something else. A long, low, rumbling moan, like a creature waking up from a nightmare. Elliot screamed, Run! It's coming! The sheriff shoved Elliot behind him. The federal agent drew his weapon. The patrol officers backed away in a panic. Then, something slammed against the inside of the bunker wall. Boom! Dust shot out of the hatch. Boom! The ground vibrated under our feet. The sheriff shouted, Everyone back! Back now! Elliot screamed again, No, please, close it! Close it! But before anything could be closed, a massive metallic screech echoed from inside the bunker, and the hatch door flung open even wider, bent nearly in half. A blast of cold, damp air rushed out. And sitting in the shadows was a shape. A tall shape. A thin shape. Standing upright. Watching us. Not moving, not speaking, just breathing, slow, deep, wrong. Tommy buried his face in my stomach, sobbing. The sheriff raised his gun. Show yourself. The shape leaned forward slightly, Moonlight touched its outlines, long limbs, bare skin, two long fingers gripping the edge of the hatch. The sheriff's voice hardened almost to a growl. "Final warning. Step out." The tall figure stepped forward, one foot emerging into the moonlight. A human foot, but pale, dust-covered, and trembling. Then, a whisper drifted out of the bunker, soft, broken, human. "Help me." The sheriff froze. The agent froze. I froze. Elliot stared, horrified. Tommy peeked up, terrified. The sheriff whispered, "Dear God, how many people were buried down there?" The figure stepped closer, and into the light stepped another person, thin, starved, alive. A woman this time, maybe in her 40s, eyes sunken, skin gray, clothes ripped. She whispered again, "Don't leave us, down there." The sheriff grabbed his radio. "Emergency teams, we need medics and rescue crews to the east shore line now. Multiple survivors emerging." And that's when Elliot screamed again. "No, that's not all of them. There are still others. Deeper." Before we could react, a roar echoed from deeper inside the bunker, a sound no human throat could make. The sheriff stiffened. The agent raised his gun. The woman screamed. Elliot collapsed to his knees, and the bunker began to shake violently. As something huge and not human started climbing upward, the ground shook so violently that Tommy nearly fell from my arms. I grabbed him tighter, holding him close as the earth rumbled beneath our feet. The bunker hatch rattled like something massive was pounding from below. The thin woman who had just emerged collapsed into the sheriff's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The sheriff shouted over the roar, "Everyone back! Fall back now!" The federal agent aimed his gun directly at the hatch. "Sheriff, whatever that thing is, it's coming up." Elliot Granger, still kneeling in the dirt, covered his ears and screamed, "You don't understand. It's not an animal. It's not a monster. They kept him down there." "Him?" the sheriff barked. "Who's him?" Elliot grabbed the sheriff's jacket. "The foreman! The foreman of the construction team! He discovered the truth before anyone else. They drugged him, dragged him inside, locked him underground. But something happened down there. The chemicals, the fumes, they changed him." My heart pounded. Changed? How? But Elliot couldn't answer, because the ground beneath the bunker buckled, and something enormous slammed against the underside of the hatch once more. Boom! The metal bent upward. Dust and soil rained down. The federal agent yelled, "We need national response on site, now!" The radios crackled, voices screamed, and emergency sirens echoed faintly in the distance from far-off fire trucks racing toward us. But they were still minutes away. We didn't have minutes. The bunker hatch exploded upward with a metal shriek that pierced the entire lakeside. The thing inside lunged. Everyone screamed. But then we froze, because the creature, this enormous, twisted shape, didn't climb out. Instead, it stopped, right at the edge of the hatch. Breathing, hard, raspy, strained. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "What is it doing?" Elliot stood, trembling. "He can't come out." The light. The light hurts him. The federal agent stepped closer, gun raised. He's afraid? No, Elliot whispered. He's in pain. The sheriff took a cautious step forward. Elliot, if this was once a man, can he even understand us? Elliot nodded slowly. He understood me in the dark. He asked for water. He asked for help. He cried. His voice broke. He begged for forgiveness. The sheriff lowered his gun slightly. The federal agent snapped, "Sheriff, do not approach that thing." But the sheriff ignored him. He approached the hatch carefully, one slow step at a time, aiming his flashlight downward. "Foreman," the sheriff called softly. "My name is Sheriff Dalton. If you can understand me, we're here to help you." At first, nothing moved. Then, the bunker creature shifted its head, slowly, cautiously, into the light. And I swear my heart broke inside my chest. It was a man who had spent 15 years underground, a man who had been starved, altered by chemicals, deprived of light and air. His eyes were sensitive to the brightness, pale, glassy, barely human anymore. His skin had gray patches. His muscles had withered. His spine seemed twisted from years in cramped darkness. But he was still a man. A suffering, broken man. The sheriff softened his voice. "Foreman, it's okay. You're safe now. We're not like them." The creature, no, the man, let out a choking sob, a human sob. Tommy whispered, "Mr. Henry, he's crying." And he was. Tears rolled down the man's dirt-covered cheeks. He reached toward the sheriff with a shaking hand. Not attacking. Not threatening. Begging. The sheriff lowered his gun fully. "We're going to bring you out. Slowly. Carefully." The federal agent hissed under his breath, "Sheriff, this is insane." "No," the sheriff said firmly. "This is justice." Two responders rushed forward with stretchers. They put on thick gloves and protective suits. The man continued to sob, his body trembling each time the flashlight beam hit his face. The sheriff raised his hand gently. "Dim the lights. He can't handle brightness." The agent hesitated. "Agent," the sheriff said with a low authority, "dim the lights." The agent obeyed. The moment the lights softened, the bunker man calmed. His breathing steadied. The responders approached slowly, speaking softly, coaxing him into the open air. Tommy pressed his face into my stomach again. Why would anyone hurt him like that? I stroked his hair. Because some people forget what kindness means, child. But nights like this remind us why kindness matters. As the responders lifted the bunker man onto a stretcher, Elliot Granger cried into his hands. "They buried us because we tried to protect people. They did all of this to hide their crimes." The sheriff placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder. "Not anymore. This ends tonight." The federal agent radioed headquarters. "We have multiple survivors. Repeat, multiple survivors who were presumed dead. This is a criminal operation beyond any HOA authority." The sheriff looked at me, eyes heavy but determined. Henry, tonight, we saved more lives than we ever expected. I felt tears fill my old eyes. Sheriff, what happens now? Before he could answer, a new voice shouted from the woods. Sheriff, the storm is coming in. We need to evacuate the entire lakeside immediately. The ground is too unstable. This whole place may collapse. The sheriff nodded. Move everyone now. Fire trucks arrived. EMTs swarmed in. The burning cabin was finally put out. Survivors were loaded into ambulances. The federal team took control of the bunker site. The sheriff turned to Tommy and me. Henry, grab whatever you can from your cabin. You and the boy will ride with me. Tommy squeezed my hand. Mr. Henry, don't leave your cabin. Please. I looked back at the only home I'd ever known, its warm lantern light glowing in the distance like a final goodbye basare. The porch where my wife and I had danced, the rocking chair where I'd sat every sunset, the lake that had held every memory of my life. I whispered, Goodbye, Lily. I'll be back when it's safe. Tommy hugged me tight. We walked together toward the sheriff's truck. As the wind howled and emergency lights flashed across the lake, the sheriff said, This community will rise again, but this time, truth wins, kindness wins. People like Elliot, like you, like Tommy, you're the real heart of this place. I smiled faintly. And what about the HOA? The sheriff smirked. Let's just say, the new HOA will need a leader who actually cares. I blinked. Who? He looked straight at me. You, Henry. I nearly stumbled. Me? Sheriff, I'm too old. You're the only one they trust, he said firmly. And after tonight, you're the only one who understands what community really means. Tommy looked up at me with hopeful eyes. You should do it, Mr. Henry. You're kind, and brave, and smart. My heart warmed. Maybe. Just maybe. My quiet life still had purpose. As the sheriff helped the last survivors into ambulances, he looked over the collapsing lake and said, Tonight, the truth came out of the ground, and tomorrow, we rebuild. He placed a strong hand on my shoulder and added, And we rebuild with kindness first. Tommy hugged my leg again, and for the first time that night, I felt hope. Real hope, that no matter how dark things get, kindness will always bring light, community will always bring healing, and the truth will always rise, even from the deepest lake. The sheriff nodded. Let's go, Henry. A new chapter begins.